You could listen to one of those other stations, but what would your friends think?
He's worked alongside Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore as the co-author of Hal Moore on Leadership, Winning, Win Out, Gunned It Out, Man. Not only that, he was the Military Writers Society of America Author of the Year for 2021. Has so many nominations, I didn't even write them down over the years. Honestly, his writings have probably told more stories in history than I ever got from a history book. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Mike Guardia.
DB Radio.
Before we jump into your latest book, The Combat Diaries, True Stories from the Frontlines of World War II, how the hell have you been, brother? It's been a minute.
I gotta tell you, brother, I've been great. I am living what I can only say is my best life, and I am waking up every morning on this side of the dirt. I am doing what I love, surrounded by the people I love, and I got a lot of good memories from my time in service, and able to share my passions with wonderful people like you.
I appreciate it. It's always good to have you on. I know, we say it every time you're on here, but it's an honor to have you on. It really is. I mean, to know
you, honor to be here.
To know you and to be able to share time with you, man, it's beautiful. I mean, the first time we had you on was Hal Moore on Leadership, which was what, 18, 19, somewhere in there?
Yeah, gosh, brother, it had to have been, I think it was the summer of 2018.
Yeah.
I think it was.
Yeah, it's hard to believe it's been that long. We were talking, I was talking to somebody the other day about Objective Zero, and we've been with them since before they were an app, and I was like, oh my God, it's been multiple years. Like, you can't say 2 years. It's like years, It's like, oh my God, time has flown. Since we first had you on, for Hal Moore on Leadership to now, how much has changed for you as far as being a writer and things of that nature?
Well, I think I've expanded my wheelhouse, and I also think that I've been able to feel a deeper connection with a lot of the subject matters that I've taken on. I think that now, really as a function of where we are in the geopolitical landscape, now that the war in Afghanistan has wound down, and we have a lot of returning veterans who are getting out of the service and who are reintegrating into society, I think that veteran stories take on a more meaningful flavor with the public in general. And being that it's a rough time for a lot of other people on the international stage, these veteran stories are really going to resonate across borders. So I think for me, the biggest thing has just been trying to find these veteran stories and get them out to the general public. And really, for me, what's changed the most is just being able to make those meaningful connections and keep those connections going forward, and just trying to keep those good ties with the veterans community in a way that keeps their stories out in the public.
Right, definitely. You and I are roughly the same age. I'm not going to put our ages out there because nobody actually needs to know that. But we grew up in roughly the same generation as far as, like you said, political and wars and stuff of that nature. From then to when you started doing these books to now, how has writing the stories changed? I know everything's a passion, right? But our passions change dramatically when we start getting involved in things. And I know things have hit you way differently than it would somebody who's writing a biography for somebody that's already dead and they never got to live with them or talk to them. I mean, you've got to speak to Hal Moore and all of these soldiers over the years and talk to their families. So from then to now, has it been a big change perception-wise and motivation-wise, or is it about the same, or?
I really think it has. I think that really the biggest change has just been seeing how multiple people can perceive the same event. Because when you and I were growing up in the 90s, a lot of the history that was presented to us was really a bird's eye view of all of these different historical events that happened. And, throughout, I think, the formal educational experience that we have as American students, it's typically presented to us in those broad, sweeping terms, and you don't really get the full view of what these historical events look like at the end user level. So when I started writing books, that was really the biggest change for me. It took these events that I only knew in a macro sense, these events that I had only read about and that I had seen about through documentary footage from the bird's eye view, and really get into the personal perspectives of the people who were there to experience it in real time, and how all of those events have affected them many years and even decades down the line. And what I think I've learned in an even broader sense, and what I want to come across in each of the stories that I write, is that war is never a clinical pursuit. There's always a very intimate human dimension to it. We can all agree on the facts of what happened, like this conflict started on this particular date, ended on this particular date, and it involved these units doing these maneuvers to seize this objective. But you really get a richer part of the story when you see how all the different key players perceived it, and how they took those experiences forward with them into their everyday lives. Because you have all these events that have affected people in a positive way, and then you have these events that have affected people in an incredibly negative way. Many of our comrades, even, who were just not able to effectively wrestle with a lot of the demons that they have carried forward with them ever since they hung up the uniform.
Right, you're exactly right. I feel you on all that. When you were growing up, I take it you read a lot of books?
Oh, yeah, I did. I mean, they were, I think they were probably the general grade school variety fare. Maybe these books that were 100 pages, all pretty much written in very basic language. But yeah, as I got older, I started to read a lot more, and started getting my hands on any historical treatise I could find.
Well, I asked that because one of the books that I remember first grabbing as far as a history account of something like you would pick up that you have written, right, it was The Flying Tigers, and it was by John Tolan. I don't know if you've read that or not. And it's about World War II and American fighter pilots in China and Burma and all that. And what drove me to it wasn't what was on in the words. It was the cover. It was this badass plane with this mouth open. I was like, I've never seen a plane like that. That is cool, right? And I'm a kid, so obviously that's going to draw me into it. And I say that because every cover on every one of your books, whether it's a children's book or nonfiction or what have you, is so powerful. And when I opened up the package the other day and pulled this out, the Combat Diaries, True Stories from the Frontlines of World War II, holy hell, dude. Like, I know they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, but coming from somebody whose family was in World War I, World War II, Vietnam, I was in Iraq, I can trace my lineage all the way back to Admiral Wood and the Scottish Navy and that shit. Like,
nice.
It touches me differently than it would a civilian that is picking it up to just for a reading moment, right? Just to pass time. And then I turned it over on back and seen that, and I was like, holy hell, like, I don't know what goes through your mind when you're obviously designing the cover or trying to pick out what fits what. But even if you hadn't have said that was World War II, automatically I'd have been like, World War I too, and then turned it over on back. I was like, definitely, right? So what is your thought process, for lack of a better term, when you're coming up with these covers? Because the last 2, 3 are just mind-blowing. And then, like I said, this one almost brought me to tears. I'm not going to lie.
Right. Well, thank you, brother. I sure do appreciate that. So when I think about how I want the covers to be designed, really the first thing that goes through my mind is what central image I can really have readers identify with. It has to be something that a little bit of symbology and something that's iconic, something that will really grab the reader's attention and will resonate with them as an impactful image and key them in to what the book is really about. And I know that that's a very broad concept, but what I try to do is I try to go through as many different image libraries as I can to find something that if I put it against a stock photo background is really going to stand out. And there are a lot of different factors that will influence the decision. I'll start tweaking what I want to do as far as the color scheme goes, how I want the contrast and the lighting to look, what parts of the image I want to emphasize, where I might want to crop it, what color schemes or heat signatures that I might even want to add to it. If I want to make the image angled, whether I want to have it done from a forced perspective or not.
Right.
But the overall goal is to find one central image that the reader can focus on, something that is a focal point. What also goes into that is the type of fonts that I use. There's certain color schemes, and there have been like half a dozen studies out there published on the psychology of how you make taglines and how you make movie posters and like the exact positioning of where you want something to really to grab a viewer's attention.
Right.
But I do that with the color schemes and the fonts. And I really got to hand it to my cover designer. Her name is Mel Stevens. I've used her for the last, 5 or 6 book projects I've worked on. But she really is tremendous. She is a Photoshop wizard. And if there were anything close to calling Photoshop a superpower, man, she has it in spades because, she can take a lot of the rough sketches that I give her and all of the scribbled side notes to say, hey, here's what I'm thinking about. Here's kind of how I want it to look. And, she must be a mind reader because she makes these things spot on and just really makes all of the iconography pop. And, it's especially helpful for somebody like me because I have zero artistic skills, brother. I mean, if there was a way to mess up doing stick figures, I could probably do it.
Well, I know it's cliche to say, but it's absolutely beautiful. Just you don't even have to open it, and you've already got a sense of what you're going to be stepping into. One thing I wanted to point out to begin with is the dedication. It's for Mom, Dad, Marie, Marie and Melanie, and to the memory of Joan, and I'm probably going to screw this up, and please correct me, with Nasiri, 54 to 22.
Correct.
Do you want to talk about that dedication at all?
Absolutely, brother. So she was the closest thing to a second mother that I ever had. She was a very close friend of the family's, really a staple in the community, and just an incredible woman who had a tremendously positive impact on every single life that she touched. By trade, she was a professional piano teacher, and she actually used her music to leverage the power of ministry. She was a church pianist for, I want to say the better part of 35 years, and I think it was even longer than that. But just an incredible woman who was a very close personal friend of the family's, and the world is qualitatively a lesser place without her. And being that she had such a tremendous impact, not only on my life, but on the lives of so many other people in the community, I said, you know what? I am also going to add a dedication to Joni because, by God, she deserves it. And even though we are all collectively lesser people without her here, I know that heaven has improved by her presence. And she's probably giving an epic concert to the angels right now.
I love it, brother. That's beautiful. I really do. I know she'd be very appreciative of you just mentioning her, but dedicating it to her. I know she would absolutely just want to hug you and kiss you and love on you. It's wonderful, brother. before I hand it over to Oink to talk about the book, because he got to read all of it, and I didn't get to read all of it. The introduction to this book, I did get to read that, and I did get to read a few of the first pages, but I've read a lot of introductions and forewords and you name it. This one is something you would hear over a movie trailer for a documentary, and it is so damn good. How did you come up with that? And where was your mindset for the introduction? Because that literally is a voiceover for a trailer. I mean, straight up, brother.
Well, brother, I'm so glad you like it. The only thing I can really attribute it to is spot on inspiration. I wanted to have an opening that would really do justice to all the veterans that I was talking about throughout the book. So I'm like, okay, well, how can I make a setup that really encompasses who all of these veterans were and, how they fit within the broader picture of everyone who got drafted or everyone who answered the call of duty. And it was like lightning struck, and I was like, yeah, you know what? I think I'm going to open it like this, and I'm going to say, hey, these are guys who came from the wheat fields of Kansas, or they came from the streets of LA, or they came from the streets of Brooklyn, or a few Hollywood pretty boys even got the bug to serve their country, and by God, they did it, and they did it fabulously. And no matter what walk of life they came from, they bonded together, and they all said, hey, here's a job that we have to do that is for the sake of humanity. We have to defeat the forces of fascism, and we're all in this together. And that's why I think they've really earned the title of the greatest generation. And then, I was like, okay, you know what? I think if I frame it like that, that'll be the best segue into exploring who each of these guys were and what all they accomplished.
I'm not going to read this entire introduction, but I want to give the listeners just a glimpse of what this is so they know what I'm coming from. The introduction states, World War II was the most destructive conflict in human history. At its peak, the U.S. military drew some 16 million men into its ranks to defeat the Axis powers. It goes on to say, they were ordinary men who accomplished extraordinary things. Today, we call them the greatest generation. And I mean, just that alone is something you would hear on History Channel coming up for a television series. Like, I love you. I mean, I read that and I was like, oh, hell yeah, we're going to get into it. Like, that's seriously, and I even told Oink during the pre-show, I said, that is a literal trailer right there. And I just wished I could be in your head just for like a second. But I'll shut up. And since Oink got to read it from cover to cover, I'll let him scrape your mind a little bit and see what he can pull from it, if you don't mind, brother.
Well, first of all, let me start off by saying I was never a history buff in high school, and hindsight's always 20/20. I want to kick myself in my own ass for that. But you have a way of pulling emotions out of people, especially myself, when, like I said, not a history buff, but reading some of the stories, I was stationed at Okinawa, and so much history on that island that I never took part in, that I'm now literally kicking myself in the ass for. But like I said, the stories, the way you can tell them, brings out that emotion of, man, why didn't I take part in more activities like that? And the other thing is, I was stationed in Germany as well. Same thing. So much history over there that I could have took more part in that I didn't. And now, hindsight 20/20, I want to kick my own ass for that. But I just want to say you have a definite talent for bringing out these men and women's stories and bringing out their emotions and stuff that you could feel yourself. That's why it was so hard for me to put the book down, because once you start to get to reading their stories and listening to what these men and women went through, that it's hard to forget this was an actual event. This was something that they themselves lived and went through. And like you said, it's just that you hear history in high school, which is nowhere near the history that you're putting forth of these tremendous folks, the greatest generation, and you do it so well. So first off, let me just start with that. But there's so many stories in there that, like I said, it just brought back emotions and memories and stuff like that. And Omaha Red, one of the guys, being the first there on the beach for D-Day as a forward observer, and then the great part where he's arguing with a general at the end, who was kind of calling him out on it. I don't know if that you want to talk about that a little bit, or I just found it amusing how he kind of shut that general down. It was awesome.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, that actually resonated with me quite a bit because both in and out of the military, I know we've all had to deal with people who love to play gotcha games, and they love to try to take digs at you, and they try to find holes in whatever story that you're telling them, and they do it so smugly, and it really can't help but get under your skin. And I think one of the best examples of karma, and probably one of the best examples of giving somebody their just desserts, is to shut them down and say, hey, mister, I was there, you weren't. Your reasoning is flawed. I know that you're trying to deconstruct it, but you're just putting on public display that you're an ignoramus. So do yourself a favor, shut it down, and walk away. And this particular part of the story that you're referencing, Oink, is years later when he was at a commemorative event and he was speaking to a number of people in the audience about his experiences being the first man on Omaha Red. He was saying, okay, here is what happened. Here is what I saw as a forward observer. I was hiding underneath all these rocks, and I was calling in all this naval gunfire and artillery fire. And, to relay that story and then to have some pompous retired general come out of the woodwork and say, well, goodness, I don't believe that you were the first man on the beach because I've looked through the official records and read the official history, and that's just impossible. And the way he handled it, it was so simple but so artful at the same time, because he said, General, what war did you fight in? Oh, I was in Korea. And Bill's like, yeah, I thought so. You look way too young to have fought in World War II. And besides, I don't remember seeing you or any other high-ranking general or official historian or reporter with a camera at 2 a.m. on the beaches of Normandy. And that was enough to take the wind out of like 50% of his sails right there. And, then to kind of see that general start tap dancing and say, oh, well, I had a question about the technicality of, blah, blah, blah. And to have Bill's comeback be words to the effect of, well, I saw it happen in real time, and I can attest to what the ballistics of those guns can accomplish. And there are at least 24 dead Germans who would ardently disagree with your assessment. But it's too bad that they're not alive to disagree with you in real time.
Yep. Yeah, the tactful way that he did that, I thought was just a joy to read. If you know what I'm saying, because we've all had some toxic leadership in the past, that we wish we could tell off. But he did this so elegantly; it was perfect. Another story that I found out was pretty interesting was Charles E. Kelly, the Medal of Honor recipient. The things that he did, went through, and then the way it ended. Obviously, it wasn't something that was very pleasant, but it was one of those stories that you could definitely relate to, that you've heard and you've actually seen through other veterans.
Right, and that really is a modern day tragedy, because here you have a kid who really grew up on the wrong side of the tracks, and there are probably a number of reasons as to why he was a juvenile delinquent, but he was able to find redemption in the military. And despite his criminal background, he was accepted into military service. He was classified 1A for the draft, and really took to the military lifestyle. And not only that, he had proven himself to the point where he had become a junior NCO. And in a battle that I can only describe as something that would come out of a movie script, he pretty much single-handedly defended a piece of terrain and a piece of real estate from a German advance guard that was coming off of a nearby hill. This was in the middle of Altavilla, Italy. And, for him to keep his wits about him for that long, and when one of his rifles runs out of ammunition, he grabs another one, then he grabs a bar, he grabs a Browning automatic rifle. When that runs out of ammunition, he grabs a machine gun. When that runs out of ammunition, he goes to find something else. Then when that one no longer serves him, he picks up a bazooka, he fires off a few rounds. Then when all the rounds of that have run dry, he takes these mortar shells and he said, oh, hey, you know what? I can make this into a Johnny-on-the-spot grenade. Takes the mortar shell, taps it on the windowsill, which activates the charge, and then starts tossing it out the window at the advancing Germans, and is able to do this over the course of several hours and, become essentially a one-man rear guard operation while he's allowing the surviving members of his unit to escape out the back door and then join them at the rally point with barely his life intact. When you read about what he was doing from beginning to end, you're like, wow, if there was something beyond the Medal of Honor to give that guy, he really earned it. And that was the first Medal of Honor to come out of the European theater, which, made him in more ways than one a national celebrity. But I think in a story arc that befalls a lot of returning veterans, they achieve success on the battlefield, but when they transition to civilian life, things don't always work out for them as well as they should, because he ran into a lot of hardship throughout his post-military career. Had a failed business, had his first wife pass away and deplete a lot of his family finances into trying to keep her alive as she was battling cancer, and then finds redemption briefly when he marries someone else and is able to secure a job in the state of Kentucky. But for one reason or another, he just couldn't effectively wrestle with the demons that he had brought home from the war, and ends up living an itinerant existence after abandoning his family, and then ultimately facilitates his own death. Yeah, so it's in equal parts triumph and tragedy, and the subtext that I want a lot of the readers to take away from that is that, even though we think of World War II as a good war, and we're certainly proud that we won, and, we're proud that we defeated the forces of Nazism, the mental health and the long-term well-being of our returning veterans in that conflict was little more than an afterthought.
Yep.
And it's something that we need to pay a lot more attention to now with our own returning veterans, and thank God that there's more of a foundation in place to help returning veterans and help transitioning, help the transitioning veterans, whether it's at the VA, whether it's at Wounded Warrior, whether it's the DAV, or if you're still on active duty, it could even be the Warrior Transition Units. But there is a much more forceful effort to make sure that our veterans are well adjusted and that they can readjust after a life in the military.
If you don't mind, really quick, to add on to what Mike's saying, I think a lot of where people's mindset too at the time was, let's do this parades and fanfare and congratulate the returning soldiers and everything will be fine. And that's great. That's wonderful to come home to. That first few days, it's great to be on the up and up and happy and celebrating. But I think a lot of them, especially that time, because I think most of us had grandparents from that time, were so hard. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but nobody showed emotion. And I think most of our generations took away some of that, and we still hold it. I know I do. I'm a hard ass. I hate crying.
No, I perfectly agree with you. I mean, when you're born and raised basically during the Great Depression, where you were fighting for food scraps, just to get a meal, and then to have this war come up, after just going through a World War I, so now you're doing it again, but now it's against somebody that's just totally evil, like Hitler was, and the surprise by the Japanese, kind of threw us on that front as well. And just some of the torture that they talked about that some of these guys and women went through, just the brutality of war itself. It's something that wasn't captured on camera a lot back in the day, or talked about, in medias and what have you. So just the brutality of war back then was, recognizable today, I think.
Well, also, I've brought this up before, and I think I brought it up a couple weeks ago, and WarDawg was with us too. Some of the best comedians have went through the worst of pains, and who came out of World War I and II? You've got Don Rickles and Jimmy Stewart and Walter Matthau, and I can go on with actors who were in these wars. James Stewart flew a fucking plane, and Walter Matthau was his gunner. I mean, and then you look at Don Rickles' humor, and then you look at somebody else who didn't go through war or go through civil rights or anything like that, and they're good. I'll give them credit, but it's not as reality-based, right? It's not as painful when you get down to the nitty-gritty of what you're laughing at. And I've not dove deep into all of these people's, i.e., celebrities' lives, but when you get to see interviews or read stories where they were talking about their time in war, it was so miserable and they never forgot about it. And again, I think our grandparents and ancestors at that time were in the mindset of, okay, we've done we gave you praise, you should be happy now. And the fact that everybody was quote unquote hard, it was a suck it up and move on moment, and nobody like today shed light on PTSD or depression or the realities of after war, right? Like you can leave the battlefield, but the wars never leave your mind ever. Like none of that never leaves. The pain is still there, whether you got shot or watched your best friend die. It's there, and I hate to be the Debbie Downer, but it's true, and I think you Mike, doing this book and the other books and any book that actually shows, hey, I'm not the only one, because like you were talking about, that story is the reality of many of our brothers and sisters who've unfortunately joined the 22. Like, that's because if you talk to them, that's all they would think about was, why wasn't it me, and et cetera, et cetera. So again, thank you for that, Mike.
Absolutely, brother. It's my pleasure.
Sorry, Mike.
Yeah, something else that I kind of picked up on, though, too, is that, this is just 16 stories of folks that were located, I'm assuming, in your area of the woods in Minnesota area, so how many more stories are out there that haven't been told, that should be told, that should be recognized, and this is just 16 stories that are amazing, first of all. Like I said, you have a way of bringing those stories out into life, that makes the reader actually feel, some of the emotions that they went through. But, like I said, Commando Kelly, any guy that can fire enough rounds that the barrel gets hot enough that it sets a bed on fire, he's a badass. So, like I said, I just think you have a great way of putting these stories together and out there. And, like I said, continue to do it, because these stories need to be told.
Absolutely, brother. And, I can tell the listening audience out there tonight that that this installment of the Combat Diaries is actually the first in an anthology. Because there's at least going to be a volume 2 and a volume 3 of the Combat Diaries that are going to be compiling even more stories like this. Because Oink, it's just like you said, brother. There are so many stories out there that I think need to have a broader audience and really need to be told. And for as long as I have the means, and for as long as I am drawing oxygen and have the mental wherewithal to do it, brother, I'm going to keep on telling these stories.
And
I know I appreciate it.
Exactly, and I mentioned my family that's been in all these numerous wars, whether it was in America or elsewhere. I don't regret anything in life, but I do regret that when I was younger, I didn't know that my uncle was in Vietnam. I didn't know that until after he died, and I've got his freaking combat boots literally in my closet. And then my grandpa, I knew he was in the Army. That's all I ever knew. I didn't know what war or anything. And then I found out he was in World War II, and I've got his butt pack, and it says wood on it. Like, he literally wrote with a marker wood. And it's like, if I could go back, I would so pick their brains if they were willing to talk. Like, the stories that comes from them, and even if they'd wrote it down, you know what I mean? Like, and that's one thing I wanted to know. Like, did you compile this and write it from families, from archives, from interviews?
It was a little bit of all three, brother. Of all of the gentlemen who appear in that book, only 3 of them are still living today, and they are all in their late 90s. But this was a combination of both individuals whom I interviewed, or they were materials that were provided by family, or they were things that I had come across in archival research, and even other historians, even local members of the American Legion who have previously interviewed veterans and maintained those interview stories and allowed me to publish them in the book. So I searched high and low to find a good mix of stories that I can put together in a narrative that I think flows and will keep the reader interested.
Yeah. No, I mean, like I said, I just found it hard to put down once you started reading their stories and get to know things that they went through and saw. Because like you said, the history that we're taught in school is nowhere close to what these men and women faced, during that time. So to have it like a firsthand accountability of these actions and stuff is amazing to read through. I mean, some of it obviously is not so happy in the ending, but it's a lot of stories I think that a lot of veterans can relate to, obviously. Um, you know, not being in a combat situation myself, I think WarDawg, if he reads the book, can relate a lot to what these men went through. So again, hats off, just the way that you put this stuff together and can tell the stories.
Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate that. And, as an interesting aside, after completing this project and compiling all the stories together, you really find out in a roundabout way just how small of a world it is out there. Because completely unbeknownst to me, while I was writing the Combat Diaries, there was one gentleman whose story I told. The story of Bob Johnson, who was the Marine artillery officer on Guadalcanal. Incredible story behind that guy, and not only his wartime service, but the longevity of his legal career afterwards. Because, here you had a guy who served as a judge. He was a district attorney for 30 years, and instead of retiring for good, became a private practice attorney for, I think, an additional 35 years. And he was actively litigating cases all the way up until his 80s. I mean, I don't think he retired for good until he was 89. But the funny anecdote that I can put behind that is, and again, this was completely unbeknownst to me while I was putting the story together, but I come to find out, right as the book is going to pre-press, that my neighbor's mother was once upon a time Bob Johnson's legal secretary.
Whoa.
I'm just thinking, oh, wow. I mean, when I found that out, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I was just like, oh, man, small world. I had no idea. But yeah, I mean, I was chatting with my neighbor, and I was mentioning the names of some of the gentlemen that I was going to be putting in the book, and I mentioned that there was a fabulous local Minnesotan who was a Marine artillery officer on Guadalcanal. It's like, yeah, he was a lawyer after the war, and wouldn't you believe this guy was was litigating cases all the way up until his late 80s, and he was being a real life Perry Mason while most of his friends are doing the shuffleboard. She asked me what his name was, and I said Bob Johnson, and she's like, "Oh my God, my mom used to work for him." And yeah,
wow,
I mean, yeah, it's yeah. So it really is a small world, and I think further the subtext would be that so many of these veterans they continue to touch lives, and they continue to be a force for good and a positive influence in their community, and the lasting legacy that they leave behind. When you can still recall somebody who your mother worked for years ago, and here we are going on 12 years that Bob Johnson's been passed on now. That really right there is the biggest indication that you've made a positive impact in somebody's life. When years afterwards they're still remembering you, and they can still speak of you fondly and remember you fondly.
I love that. That's just Jesus. That's one of those slap in the face reality moments. You're like, wait, what?
Right.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's I flip through every book I get just to get a sense of what it's going to entail and things of that nature. And one thing I love about this book is you do have some pictures, portraits and things of that nature. And it kills me. It absolutely kills me that I do not have any portraits of my grandpa in his Marine, dress, or my great grandpa in his Army greens, or anything. And I just love that you're able to put a face to these stories for the most part. Because I think when people read something like this and they don't see somebody, it's just another story. It's a real story. But I don't think it's as impactful, in my opinion, personally. I might be wrong. I don't know. But I think it's like, reading the story versus watching the movie, right? Like, you get more of a sense of the visualizations, even though it's good to read the book. It's good to read the story. I get that. But like I said, putting a face with the name, with yelling at the general, etc. I applaud you for that as well. I have nothing bad to say about Mike, you guys. I can't. I can't. I've tried. I can't. Damn it. No, I'm joking. WarDawg, I know you've been.
Brother.
WarDawg, I know you've been sitting there listening to us talk about the Combat Diaries True Stories from the Frontlines of World War II by Mr. Mike Guardia. Is there anything you want to talk to him about with this book or his writings or anything?
Obviously, I'm in awe of Mike each time he's here. So that's why I'm, in silence, just taking everything in. Because, rarely do you ever run into someone so well written, well spoken, and informed, man, as Mike is. So my hat's off to him for every single book project that he's been able to complete and bring to fruition. The things that you write and you mention within this book here, I mean, Bo mentioned it earlier with the cover alone is what hooked me. The cover and the way you were mentioning, the color tones and everything that everything that you use and want to apply towards gathering attention. You got me hooked, and you've had me hooked now for well over a year. So, almost 2 years, well over 2 years now.
Thank you, brother. I really can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And, you getting praise like that from my fellow veterans, that is what makes a lot of my endeavors worthwhile. If I can tell these stories and have them resonate with the folks who have worn the same uniform and served under the same flag, I will consider all of these endeavors successful. It's always a pleasure to be on the show and be able to share this with you guys because, real matter of speaking, I mean, we all belong to that 1%, and sometimes it seems that the population of that 1% is shrinking every day.
Yeah. It definitely is. I want to tell everybody, we talk about Betsy Ross and the Fight series and how easy it is to read her book and how short it is. And Mike is right there alongside her. His books are so easy to read.